Urioma. 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 Urioma.
Urioma li li li.
Urioma.
Urioma li li li.
Urioma.
Muna nwanne gara ọhịa nkụ na-abeze.
Urioma.
Mkpacha nkụ ghara nwanne nke m.
Urioma.
Onye anya mma bịala ịbụ anyị na-echi eze.
Urioma.
Ndị eze anyị chiri echichi bekee.
Urioma. Dede. Urioma. Dede. Urioma. Dede. Urioma. Onye agha nwanne ya. Urioma. 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 Urioma le. Urioma. Urioma le. Urioma.
Ụlọ nwanne m gara ọhịa nkụ na-abeze.
Urioma. Mkpacha nkụ ghara nwanne nke m. Urioma.
Onye anya mkpa bịala ebe anyị na-echi eze.
Urioma. Ndị eze anyị chiri echichi bekee.
Urioma.
Dede. Urioma. Dede. Urioma. Dede. Urioma. Onye ala nwanne ya. Urioma. Urioma. Urioma.
Urioma.
Urioma. Urioma. Urioma. Urioma. Urioma le. Urioma. Urioma le. Urioma. 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 Urioma.
Good afternoon. What you just listened to, if you listened, it's actually a folk song from the Igbo part of Nigeria. Is there anyone in the room that understands Igbo or speaks Igbo? Ben does. Okay, I'm here, I'm gonna talk about not silence per se, but listening and listening places. But before I do that, I'll do a little bit of rerun of my work with sound. And like a lot of people know, the kind of sound works I've done over time was recording cities, the sound of cities, and I was so much interested in the urban environment around us. And that brings me to silence, but I'll talk a little bit of that because I moved from Lagos, Nigeria to Berlin in 2014 for the E.A.T artist residency. And I found out I couldn't sleep at night. And what was the reason? Berlin was too quiet. Yes. coming from Lagos to Berlin is like dropping down from 1,000 decibels to 100 decibels. And it wasn't like I lived in Kreuzberg in Berlin. They put me up in Wilmersdorf. It's really a very, very quiet place. And I had problems sleeping. And I had to play Lagos sounds at night, or I play music at night just to be able to fall asleep. So when people talk about silence, I'm curious, like, what are we listening to? What is it about the silence? Because if I'm in a city, I'm supposed to hear something, right? If I want to hear the birds or nature, I go to the countryside. In Lagos, we know when our neighbors are not around because of the power cuts. I know all my neighbors' power generators by heart, so I can figure out who's not at home today or who's not. Maybe they don't have fuel in their power generator, so they're not around. And also, we get really entertained before we fall asleep because most likely there's a church next door that decides to hold the night vigil, and you're forced to be part of that night vigil because then you gotta hear everything going on in the church. And I remember when I moved to where I was staying, it was one church. Then after a period of like 3 years, it became like 4 or 5 churches, all in a distance. So it became like a surround church thing. I don't even have to go to church every Sunday anymore. They keep me at home. But I start with this conversation on Sound of Cities because I'm going to talk mostly today about, one second. I'll be talking more about cultural sounds, if there's anything like that. So the title of my talk today is The Gathering Place, Ama, The Gathering Place. And Ama, it's an Igbo word, and it means village square. And that's what I said, I'm more interested about what we are listening to and how that influences our lives, because in the city, I hear the cars, that's in Lagos, I hear the traffic, I hear human noise, and in Europe here is basically trying to keep that at a minimum, or as minimal as possible. And to me, sometimes it doesn't make sense. But what are we listening to? Because from where I come from, Igbo part of Nigeria, listening is not just about hearing your environment. It's a way you get instructed. It's a way you learn the morals. It's a way you learn history. It's a way kids are taught how to observe and also how to communicate. So I start with the AMA. The title AMA, The Gathering, is the working title for a commission I did with Cleveland Museum last year. I was invited to install in the atrium of the Cleveland Museum. This is the biggest space I've ever installed in my life. We'll get to that picture, but it's a huge space, all open, and what do you do with it? In recent times, I started looking at my Igbo culture in terms of my artistic practice, also as a sound artist, because I've done a lot of recording of cities, I've done recordings with choirs, I've gone into the archives, but then I discovered, I'm a city boy, I grew up in the city, I discovered that there is a lot of cachet of sound from my culture that has not been tapped into. So for me, it was important to start exploring that notion. So when I was invited to do this, create an installation, no one knew what it would be with the space. I became more interested in how to take a gathering space where people congregate, and what do I connect that with? That was how I came up with the idea of working with the Igbo AMA, the gathering space. So the AMA for the AMA, the Igbo Public Village Square, is not just a place where people gather. It's also like the parliament. This is where they have meetings, and sometimes also it can function as a market. But what is very, very interesting about these spaces are spaces where a lot of social activities also take places. and which includes music, masquerades, singing, weddings, whatever ceremony, rituals too. So this song you heard at the beginning of the talk is a folk song from the Igbo community. We rearranged it for my sound installation. It came as a 14-channel sound installation with 40 members of the choir singing, but here we're playing a stereo. So this is the commission of the Cleveland Museum. I'm letting this slide while I talk, so most times it's not connected to that. In the AMA, it mostly starts in the center of the village. There's always a big tree, not always, but there's always a big tree on the side. And people congregate there daily for markets and for other purposes. The folk songs and the Igbo culture is not just meant for entertainment. You know, like growing up in the city, I also thought the same thing. These were beautiful music. We hear them on radio, we sing them. Maybe your grandmother sings it to you. We kind of got to know how to sing them by heart, but we didn't really pay so much attention to the lyrics because this is not how we were brought up. It also goes back to what are we listening to and for what purpose are we listening. When I started doing my research on the Igbo culture, that was when I discovered that, I mean, it's not taught in schools, but traditional Igbo societies use this music to communicate. They use this music to educate. They use this music to raise their kids. This is how morals are passed through. So we hear this music, the lyrics, we pay attention to the lyrics. These spaces are not always silent because there's a lot going on there. There could also be music, but at the point, anyone listening or the listeners are supposed to be quiet. It's only the singers performing. Then you pay attention to them. You hear them out. You listen to what they are saying. And some of the songs that these people sing are a call and response song. And it's done that way so you get sucked into it, you become part of it. You are just not observing, but you are participating. And in that way too, you are learning. So what happens is the music goes on, the solo singer starts, and the group responds to that. In that way or the other, you never forget the lyrics, and knowledge is imparted to you. So that's what the listening and other spaces are used for. The images you've seen so far was me trying to recreate or be inspired to create an Igbo square in the atrium of the Cleveland Museum. And you will notice a lot of beautiful fabrics in these spaces. These fabrics are from the Akwa region of the Igbo community. They are hand-woven by women, and also within these fabrics, they are encoded with messages. But when trying to create this space, I wasn't just interested in setting up sound, letting them sing, and people come in there to relax and listen, but I also needed to create a visual connection to the community. So that's why we made these poofs and chairs with these Akwa fabrics. And the tree especially is covered entirely with the Akwa fabric, and the tree has this NCBD symbols of trees. These are things I've been able to learn over time, trying to connect back to my culture and know what it's all about. So the sound and the music became an integral part of what I'm trying to do these days as an artist, commissioning composers to rearrange some of these songs and then to perform them in multi-channels and we record them. It's interesting because I grew up hearing a lot of these songs and thinking they were the original piece, but they weren't. They changed over time. But the familiarity and the lyrics remain constant. So even with this new arrangement, the one you've heard already, it's not how it's performed per se, but when you hear it, you know the song because you are familiar with the lyrics or you are familiar with the way it's being sung. So I'm gonna play one more track, which then I explain how these tracks are used to instill or communicate a certain form of message.
Nnenne udumara putamo udumo 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 Udu
Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Obumu surudu kobumu aludu naba. Obumu surudu kobumu aludu naba. Nene udumo. Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Obumu surudu kobumu aludu naba. Obumu surudu kobumu aludu naba.
Nene udu naraputame. Nene udu naraputame. Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Udumjitri na mamara n'udu awari. Obumu sorudu kobumu arudu naba. Obumu sorudu kobumu arudu naba.
Nene
Udum
Nene
Nene maraputamo.
Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba.
Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba. Nene udu maraputamo. Anyị gabanaba ewo, anyị gabanaba.
The song you just listened to is titled Nene Udu. Udu is the clear earthen pot which is normally used to fetch water and also sometimes used as a musical instrument. So these pots are really fragile, and basically the singer is talking about how she went to the stream to fetch water and her pot got broken. So what does she do? So with the Igbo tradition, we are trying to, we don't pass on messages, or we pass messages mostly with proverbs and idioms. So Udu, in this case, could signify the fragile antidote of life, going to the river, the E, which is, the E she's mentioning there is the river, and the river in the Igbo cosmology, a symbol of life, living, or the journey of life because of the continuous flow of water. And whoever comes to the river would fetch according to their capability and capacity, depending on the size of your pot. So singing Udum Jichubi Mamwa Maron Uduawari philosophically implies that her approach to life had failed to deliver the desired result or the desired success. Either way, this song is a song of agony that tells the start story of a broken dream. The child's lamentation, Nene Udum Arapotam, equally corroborates the agony of loss, as the child regrets not heeding the counsel of the mother to handle the fragile pot with care. So these are how this kind of music are used to instill or pass on messages of obedience, listening to your parents, or how to navigate life. Thank you.
Thank you, Emeka. So we just learned how, sound builds history and how history also builds sound or influences our way of listening. Emeka has a broad practice. What he just presented to us is a very small part of it. He is also, I got to know him because he was archiving the sounds of Lagos, a big project, which was actually, as I learned yesterday, influenced by Chris Watson. Is that correct?
Well, it was one of the, when I got into this sound practice, I didn't have much references back home, so I was checking a lot of stuff online, and Chris was one of the influences that led me to my practice.
And Chris Watson is going to talk here tomorrow. Maybe we start with questions. Anybody has a question to Emeka and his practice? Oh, I have to say one thing. I was asked to. Don't start talking before you have a microphone in your hand, because we're streaming these talks. So if you start talking before, nobody understands your question.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I wondered if you could tell us more about the transcription of the song that would appear with your slides. And since it's a folk song, I'm just wondering, is that something that you commissioned? And who were the musicians who were singing that song in its present iteration? And also, was it playing in the atrium at the Cleveland Museum? And I would imagine that Smooth invited you before he left for MoMA, yeah?
It wasn't Smooth, actually. It
Really?
was Rito. Yeah,
Oh, excellent.
I did a piece for Documenta in Athens that Rito saw, and that was how, it was also a big space with sound, so he figured out I could give the atrium a shot at. So the songs, what we had written on the music score is what I commissioned a composer and arranger to do. Like I said, these songs are normally passed down orally or vocally. They are not written down over time. But in the process of the research, where I thought most of these songs are originally in the same form, I found out that they've actually been recomposed, and that's what we've been hearing. So for copyright reasons, we couldn't just perform those ones. But like I say, these songs retain the lyrics and they retain the familiarity. So what it means is that no matter how you try to arrange it or when you are trying to arrange it, you have to bear that in mind, so anyone that hears it knows what songs what song you're talking about there. So I was also interested in, since we're doing this commission and having a new kind of composition, let's put it down as a musical score. It was on the catalog, right? And it was installed at the atrium. You know how big the atrium is, I believe, in 3 zones. So it's a random play of multi-channel sounds, and sometimes we don't have all the 14 singers performing the songs. It's just a few, just to make it more dynamic and more interesting. We're able to create this listening zone that people will just come, hang out the whole day, just listen, be quiet, and even if they don't understand the lyrics because it's in Igbo, the music also affects them emotionally, which was most of the feedback I was getting from the installation.
Any other question?
It's a very good performance, beautiful performance, but I would like to know how much arrangement, how close is the performance to the original material?
How close the music is, right?
Because you say that the song is passed down from generations and it's being rearranged. So how close is the rearrangement to the original? And have you ever thought about using the original material for your work, and what happens if you do?
Well, like I said, during the research, what I thought was the original, I realized it was a composition done probably in the 60s that's what became popular over time. So prior to that, it's still close to that, because what I heard from what they said was the one passed down. The main refrain, "Nene udumara patam," is always constant. But the way it's arranged now, we are throwing in more alto or bass or tenor than before. So this is also what the arranger did with this one now. It has to retain that refrain, "Nene udumara patam," all the time. So that is as close as it is to the original. But what is the original? What I thought the original happened not to be what the original is. And everyone will say, oh, we don't know precisely what it was because we've gotten used to singing this one. But the refrain, which is that "Nene udumara patam," is always constant, and that is what is maintained when you're trying to write something else. What was your question, the other one again? Well, like I said, it's owned by someone. I don't own that. The one I thought was the original. So we don't know precisely what the original sounded like. But that refrain has been constant over the years.
Thank you. Folklore songs, the purpose of the folklore songs is not only about listening, as we know, it's a lot about singing, and it dramatically changes the experience when we commune in the singing. Would you ever think about introducing this element into your practice?
Sorry?
Would you ever think about introducing this into your practice?
The element of singing along.
Communal singing, yes,
Yeah.
with the audience.
But the point is, you have to know the language. So if I install this piece in Nigeria, definitely everyone, or in certain parts of Nigeria, definitely everyone will be singing along. But I bear that in mind that not everyone will know that lyrics, trying to create this zone of listening, even if you don't know that lyrics. And at least, like the Udu, Arapatam, or the Udu, constantly is something anyone can pick up and participate in the song.
Okay, we have to learn the language then. Thank you.
That's what I thought.
One last question.
You said that you were coming from a big city, and more people in Africa, they go to urban places, to big cities. And the Ama, it's an important place in your culture, in the African culture, for different reasons. Are there any, let's say, any tendencies to try to create this kind of Amas in the big cities?
Unfortunately, not in this sense, but then in the theaters, there will be performances like this. But you also know in big cities, spaces matter. It's all about real estate and the prices. So no one would genuinely build this just for this. Maybe in the parks and open air spaces, people would try different kind of performances.
Okay, one last question. Ben?
Well, Emeka, first of all, I want to thank you for a really stirring and moving and evocative talk. And I just want to respond to one or two things and then ask a question. I think, first of all, the whole issue of the originality of a folk song is an impossible question to ask because it's impossible to say when a song was first sung before it, as it were, became part of the communal experience. It's like trying to trace the origins of a word. That's how mysterious it is. It might have been sung by some mother, Igbo mother, about 300, 400, 700 years ago. It's impossible to say. So to be worried about the authenticity or the originality of the folk song, in a sense, is to miss the meaning and the value of the folk song itself. Its value precisely resides in transmission. Transmission from mouth to mouth, from mother to daughter, mother to son, son to daughter, and so on and so forth. That is its precise meaning. It is meant to be transmitted, and in being transmitted, to be transmuted, to be changed, to be kept the same and changed at the same time. So you can see why this has its influence on jazz. The fact that you actually keep the same thing and you improvise, you make it your own. The other thing I want to address is that the Ama, the gathering place, is the mutability of space. The fact that one space can also be a parliament, it can be a market, that tremendous mutability, that tremendous freedom with which a space can encompass so many different things. And one more thing that it does encompass as a gathering space is that it encompasses the presence of the ancestors. So it's not just the living, it is also those who are active
Thank you, Ben.
with the dead.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Emeka. I just wanted to just throw in some words in support
much.
of your spirit.
Thank you. It's good to have another Nigerian in the building, you know. So. When is it opening? 18 February.
18.
Yeah.
Okay. Since we're in Switzerland, I would like to also inform you that Emeka is going to have an exhibition at the Tagali Museum in Basel. It's opening.
It's a group show.
Sorry?
It's a group show called. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's a gatherings for sure. So, and it opens on February 18th.
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to add is that if you're traveling outside of Switzerland and maybe going towards Copenhagen in Denmark, Tatiana Bilbao has a show there at the Louisiana Museum. So if you go there, don't miss this show either. Thank you very much. A big applause for Emeka.